Fund resources. We are recording today's session, and the recording and slides will be posted to our grant web page after the fact. And anyone who registered but was unable to attend today will also get a copy of the webinar and recording. And I'm stalling a few more minutes to let folks get connected before we officially get started. And what I'd like, if you could, take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. That way we get a sense of who's here today and what community you represent or what organization. And we will introduce ourselves in just a moment. And our intent here today is to go over everything grant related so that you feel you have everything you need to know about submitting a funding request or grant application. But we also want to hear your questions, and we'll allow plenty of pauses throughout to invite your questions. You're welcome to ask a question at any time in the chat, and we'll pause and answer that question verbally because we are making this a fully accessible session so that the recording will have all questions answered. All right, so I think we probably have enough folks on the call so that we'll go ahead and get started. And all right, so for today's webinar, we're going to go over everything about the Local Planning Capacity Grant Program, otherwise known as LPC, and the purpose of the program, why it exists, what our top priorities are for the type of projects that are likely to be awarded under this program. Eligibility, not only which communities are eligible, but what activities and project types are eligible and how much funding is available. We'll go over how to apply, what types of items you need to submit with your application, the deadlines, when you can expect to hear back about awards and get started. And again, we'll answer all of your questions throughout the session. And especially at the end, we can take a little extra time if anyone has questions that are a little more specific to your proposal. So if we need to stay on a little past the top of the hour, we can, though the intent is to finish by 3 o'clock. So again, I'm Robin DeFalco, the program manager for the Local Planning Capacity Grant Program. I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Jessica and Andy. I'll just note, I believe Andy Hill is not able to join us yet. She's coming from another meeting. She'll join us when she's able, but just so that you know, in fact, she is here. Jessica, when you add Andy, will you make sure that she's added as a co-host, please?
Yes.
Thanks. And I'll hand it over to Jessica and give her a chance to introduce herself.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Roop, and I support Robin and the LPC grant program as the program assistant.
And Andy?
Hi there, I'm Andy Hill. I manage the Community Development Office in the Division of Local Government.
All right, and so we are the Community Development Office. We're the planning folks over at Division of Local Government at DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs, and we work closely with the Division of Housing on all the other Prop 123 related efforts. So that's who we are. And thank you. If you're just joining us, please do share in the chat who you are and which communities you represent, so we have a sense of who's here today. All right, so this new funding program, relatively new, we launched it a little less than a year ago. This is part of the State Affordable Housing Fund. And if you're familiar with Prop 123, you may know that 60% of that funding goes over to the OEDIT or CHAFA agencies. We are DOLA, and 40% of the total funding comes to DOLA. And then of those 3 grant programs, our Local Planning Capacity Grant represents 5% of DOLA's funding. So it is a small dollar amount, but we believe, a huge impact to support local governments in their efforts to be successful with Prop 123 requirements and, of course, your local government commitments. So this local planning capacity grant program was written into the law or the statute in a way that defines its purpose, which we'll get to in a minute. But the best thing about this is it's an ongoing sustainable funding source. A really important thing is that it is intended to support you achieving these objectives, especially now that the program has launched and you're all working on those local government commitments and fast track requirements. We have so far held 2 funding cycles and have awarded 4.4 million, some of that in March, most recently in July. We have awarded 38 total projects, which represents 70 total local governments across the state in every region of the state. Some of those were multi-jurisdictional projects, which is how we get to 70 total communities. And we have about 4.4 million remaining through the end of June 2025. We are planning to hold 3 funding cycles annually. That could change in future years, but for right now, what's upcoming is September 2024, February of 2025, and potentially May of 2025, depending on whether all the funding has been spent and how much more demand there is. Right. So in order to be eligible to apply for this grant funding, you must be a municipality, a county, or a tribal government, and you must have filed your baseline and commitment, your Prop 123 baseline and commitment, with the Division of Housing. That process took place last summer and fall prior to November 1st. If you have not yet done that, you will get a chance. I'm estimating around September or October, prior to that November 1st deadline, DOLA will reopen that filing process and allow communities to file. You would therefore become eligible potentially in time for the September 30th deadline for this funding cycle. So if you have not yet opted in, do reach out to us and we'll support you with that process. If you're already eligible, fabulous, you're ready to apply. We also welcome collaborative, multi-jurisdictional or regional projects. And we do need, in that instance, one jurisdiction to act as the lead fiscal agent during the application process, as well as the grant implementation process. So you would manage all those reimbursements, documentation, and reporting on behalf of a multi-jurisdictional project. So again, if you aren't yet eligible, we can help with that, and you'll likely have that chance, or you can also consider a future funding cycle. Okay, so let's see. I think at this point, Andy, is this the point where I hand off to you?
I can at this point, sure. But I may need you to help chime in. My apologies.
Okay, actually, I think, Andy, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I think you're the next couple slides. So let me just stick with this and we'll get to your fast track slides in a moment.
Thanks.
All righty. So the intent of the program is to increase the capacity of local government planning departments. And I want to emphasize that this is a planning grant and your planning department should be involved. We do recognize some communities, especially smaller communities, may not have planning staff, or you might call it something else like a land use department. Whoever it is that handles applications, permit issuance, that type of thing, that's who we want involved in this project. But case by case basis, that may be slightly different. The other important thing about this program is that it was created to help local governments implement a system to expedite the review of affordable housing. And that requirement, and we'll get into that detail in a minute, but that requirement takes effect in 2027. So that's kind of the broad context of the purpose of this grant program and the part of your local government that would pursue this funding. And again, I also want to emphasize that this program can be used as a capacity grant. So we heard from many local governments who said, even if I opt into Prop 123, we're such a small team. We have no capacity to go apply for those other grant dollars. This program can help with that. So doing expedited review is a focus that we're looking to prioritize in these funding cycles, but we can also support a community that needs this capacity support. So this could be helping your community implement plans to build new housing units, which means achieving your local government commitment. Ultimately, we're really trying to support every local government's success with Prop 123 and remaining eligible in the next future funding cycles. So think of this as a program that will help you implement fast track requirements or add more capacity to your team. And with that, I want to pause in case there are any questions, and then I'm going to hand it over to Andy to get into those fast track details a little bit more. Any questions in the chat? Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Andy then. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right, so yeah, that's what Robin was talking about, is something we're really excited about. It's rare that you get funding where you can grant to communities for capacity. So we're really excited about this program, and our goal is to help communities opt into the program so that no possible funds are ever left on the table, right? That you have access to compete for all the funds you can for your projects. And to help you, once you're opted in, help you stay in so that you can continue to be eligible to compete for funds. And the two things, of course, you need to do to stay in are meet your target commitment goal and also adopt a fast track or expedited review process for affordable housing. Now, that expedited review or fast track requirement is required, the statute says 2027, but really it's November 1st, 2026. When you submit your commitment for the next 3-year cycle, that's when you will need to show, all right, we've got the fast track thing figured out for our community. This is what it looks like. And then Division of Housing will review that along with the rest of your application to go ahead and continue to opt in for the next 3-year cycle. So as a reminder, that expedited review requirement means that you have to make a final decision within 90 calendar days of a complete application. There's all kinds of caveats in that. But for projects where at least or more than half of the units or 50% or more of the units are affordable. And there's all kinds of details there, but that's the general deal. So we came up with a visual for you because we are thinking a lot about how do we help make sure that communities have the grant support that they need in time for those that need to hire some help to either help them create their fast track requirement or to refine and improve their fast track requirement to make sure it complies. We're thinking a lot about how do we make sure we get that money to them in time so they have time to apply for the award, get under contract, then hire, put an RFP out, hire their consultant, go through all the research, do all the community and stakeholder engagement, go through the adoption process. It can be lengthy for a lot of communities. And for some communities, it could easily be 1.5 years, 2 years, just because they have so many different processes and external review agencies and so on. So we came up with this visual for you to get a sense for if we're having 2 or 3 grant cycles a year, our hope is that more are coming in this coming cycle or the next one so that you get the support that you need without putting undue sort of rush pressure on you to get that adopted. So hopefully that helps. Next one. So we, just as a reminder, we have come up with some guidance on the expedited review or fast track requirement from the statute. The statutory language is fairly vague. And so we tried to put a little meat on that bones and kind of give you some guidance as far as what this could look like so that you have some confidence when you adopt your expedited review requirement or process, you have some confidence that it's going to comply. And that guidance is available on our website. And we went through a stakeholder process to come up with that guidance and really worked with developers, local governments, and some other folks to come up with something that we thought was not prescriptive, like everybody has to do it this way, but more, here's how to interpret the parameters that the statute lays out, and here's a list of strategies you can use to meet the goal. And then it's your job to figure out which of these strategies make sense for our community, our growth pressure, our process, and so on. Some of you have told us you already meet the fast track requirement, which is awesome. We're very excited that so many communities are saying, we got this, we can do this easily within 90 days. What we think about when we hear that is good, one less burden for you to worry about. Now you can focus all your effort on your commitment work, hitting that target number of units. But if you're coming in for a grant, I would still consider putting in your application, hey, we might want to look at our process, codify it so that developers have certainty and that DOLA has that certainty too, that we are committed to meeting this 90-day requirement, and here's how we're going to do it, be able to demonstrate it. So codify it, consider whether or not you can make any additional improvements or refinements or add a little more clarity, things like that. We definitely want to see and be able to offer you funds to help with the fast track requirement, because like I said, we're trying to keep you opted in so that you can continue to be eligible for the funds. I do want to say, though, I think some communities were thinking that you have to already have adopted fast track to get these funds, and you don't. You don't have to have a fast track resolution to be more competitive. But what we are saying is our priorities are keeping you opted in. And one of the requirements to keep you opted in is to have fast track. So we are prioritizing, in effect, communities in their application that are saying, in some way, they're going to look at their expedited review process, codify it, refine it, or just sort of sit back and assess their process. Is it working well? Are there other improvements that could be made, or other sort of land use code work, streamlining and so on, other incentives that you can offer, things like that could be really helpful. And that'll be one of our big priorities for the next year or two, just to make sure everybody meets that goal. Okay, so the key objective is this fast track or expedited review adoption. Happy to take questions from you all. I think one point that we want to make here is that, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to be fast, and in my attempt to be fast, I'm going slower. My apologies. Basically just that if you are addressing expedited review or streamlining in some way, like I said, it does kind of give your application priority among, like, if we don't have enough funding, right? If we don't have enough funding for all of our projects, then we will probably pick the ones that do address the expedited review process. Team, anything I forgot here that you want to add, or questions from the group?
I think that is great. Again, just to emphasize, don't feel like you have to get this done before you apply, right? The purpose of the grant is to help you do expedited review. That's something you can work on during grant implementation. So just want to pause. Any questions out there so far about fast track or anything we've covered so far? Okay, seeing none, we will move along, but Skip, please jump in, go ahead.
Hey, hi, this is Skip Shane with Rio Grande County. I'm the county administrator here. So we have a small building department that already moves very quickly through building permitting processes. We don't have that many per year, although the number that we do have keeps our two-person staff very busy. But I don't see any issues with us getting through approval for affordable housing project in more than 90 days. We'll be able to meet that mark easily in just a matter of normal business. Do we still have to implement a fast track process through a resolution or something like that from the commissioners?
It's a great question, and I love the way you worded it. So the way I would answer that is essentially at the end of 2026, you'll have to report to DOLA that you do have something in place that guarantees that an affordable housing project would be approved within 90 days. So what will you show DOLA at that point in time? And for some communities, a very simple resolution that says, yep, we'll make sure that that happens, that we are meeting those requirements in the Prop 123 law. And we actually have a template that a community like yours could easily download, put your name into it, adopt, and that's what we mean by codify it. That would be a very simple task, probably, that you would do during grant implementation. And at the end of 2026, say, this is our evidence, right? For other communities, it's going to take a lot more than that. But so, Skip, that's what I would suggest. It is possible that when you refile your next, if you choose to continue being an eligible jurisdiction under Prop 123, that DOLA will decide at that point that we'll just accept some kind of an attestation that, that's fine. But what I want to emphasize is that some smaller communities have said to us, it's never been a problem before, but maybe they haven't done a lot of affordable housing projects, and that's kind of new to them. And sometimes when you tackle these infill projects or, you start to get into the financing and the complexities that sometimes are inevitable with affordable housing projects. Now suddenly you realize our review process is taking several months. And so it might be a new thing for some communities. Maybe not, but just keep that in mind. So that's just what we're hearing from communities. So Skip, I hope that answers your question. If anyone else has anything, yeah, Andy, jump in, and then anybody else, please raise your hand if you'd like to chime in.
We do have a question in the chat. Among the many strategies we can use to increase affordable housing, does DOLA have a breakdown of how much Prop 123 could be applied to any given strategy? I might need a little more on that.
Yeah, it sounds like your question is getting, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but you're really talking about how to build those new units. And I guess what I would say is that there is no set dollar amount. All the state agencies are trying to award the amount of funds that each community would need to make that project pencil. And in some cases, we're saying maybe some funding from this pot and some funding from another pot. And in order to ensure that you're successful, we want to make sure you get all the funding you need. But it's really variable for every grant program under Prop 123 or loan, right? There's some grants and loans. And so it really depends. And if you wanted to get more specific, that's the kind of thing that we could get into. But some of them are a few 100,000 to a few 100 million, not a few 100 million, but a few million, I should say. Some of them are pretty big awards and some are small. It really depends.
Thanks, Robin and Andy. I guess to clarify my question, I'm Eve Nath, by the way, from the town of Lyons. So an earlier slide, I don't have it in front of me, but it showed like 5% of your pot would be for capacity and fast tracking. So I guess my question is, the other 95%, what is that being? As the town of Lyons, we're trying to figure out what strategies we want to focus on for increasing affordable housing. And one of the strategies might be fast tracking, for instance. But are there other strategies where there's a bigger pool of Prop 123 available to us if we prioritize those strategies instead?
Great. Thank you for that clarification. So this grant program represents 5% of the total funds available for DOLA. DOLA represents 40% of the total funds available under Prop 123 in any given year. So there's a total of 327 million available through all the different funding programs this year. And Eve, community by community, I'm always happy to chat with your community and have a conversation about which funding programs are going to help your community get those units. It's so different for every community, and then refer you to the people who run those other funding programs. But there are large numbers of money out there, large amounts of money out there, and each community is going to have to go after that, right? And then pitch the housing project that is a good fit for that funding program. So happy to get more into that later. And I can also share some links in the chat towards the end about the other DOLA money and what's being prioritized in the current fiscal year, like what projects would score high. So let's go ahead and move to our next, unless there are any other questions out there that somebody wants to jump in. And we'll probably start to get into some other answers to the questions that might be out there. All righty. Jessica, I believe this is your section.
Yes. So I would like all of you to think broadly about multiple project elements that could be folded into your grant that are affordable housing related. You don't need to narrow your scope too much. We are specifically supporting capacity building, so think about everything that you will need to meet your Prop 123 requirements. Please bear with me as I narrate for you what's on the next two slides to provide guidance on the types of activities and expenses that are eligible. So we have staff, personnel, and contract expenses, regulatory changes such as land use or development code amendments. You can implement lean business principles to improve interagency coordination on housing review and approval, new software or technology to streamline the review process, planning efforts to convert or preserve existing housing units, tracking or documenting activities related to Prop 123 requirements and compliance, project-related RFP bids and advertisements. We also support attorney fees, costs associated with our agency agreement to partner with other jurisdictions on affordable housing in a regional capacity, activities that support local government's capacity to increase expedited review, and other funding opportunities such as grants and data collection on site inventory of publicly owned land for future affordable housing projects. If you have an other cost that is directly associated with achieving your Prop 123 goals, let us know and we can talk to you about that. We also have a lengthy FAQ document on our website that has more details on these eligible expenses. Are there any questions about those? I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so we can move on to the funding that's available. Thus far, we have awarded $4.4 million in the first two rounds of funding, and that has gone to support over 70 jurisdictions in Colorado. We still have $4.8 million to award in the next two funds remaining in the fiscal year 24-25. Our suggested award amount is $200,000. So far, the average award amount has come in at around $116,000, just to give you an idea of what we've seen so far as you're tailoring and writing your proposal. Larger grants amounts may be considered, specifically if you're doing a multi-jurisdictional project, and there is a 20% match requirement. no in-kind matching. You're not allowed to use other DOLA grant dollars for your match. But you can use some of your ARPA money if you still have that, but typically it's general funds that we're seeing as that match. I think that is all for me.
Right, and we do have a little more on the match coming up in a minute. I'm going to go over this next section about how to apply. So the good news is you've attended the webinar, so you're getting the benefit of this overview. It's not required, but it's certain, we hope it's helpful to folks. I strongly encourage you to go to the website and review all of the application materials. And I forgot to say earlier that if we haven't yet, let's paste the links into the chat, both the LPC grant page and the fast track page. That's going to be really helpful for folks. And then what you'll see on that page is that it is a prerequisite that you schedule a pre-application meeting with the program manager. That's me. It'll usually be me, Jessica, and possibly your DLG regional manager if that individual is available, and all the members of your team that you want to be part of this discussion. And we can get into the details of your project. You will also need official action by your local governing body. Basically, your city council, your board of trustees needs to approve your grant submission and your commitment to the match, right? So that's what we're looking for. More on that in a minute. Prepare your application and your budget, obviously, and then submit. The grant submission happens through the DLG grant portal, which is that link in the chat. DLG's grant portal is separate from Division of Housing. So in case you've done that, this is a separate place. So a little more here. When you're on that program website, you'll find this link a couple places, but basically schedule a pre-application meeting and it opens this calendaring tool where you can see my availability. You can consider your calendar and your availability and book a time. It uses Google Meet as the video conferencing system. If you prefer Zoom or Teams or anything else, just use that tool to see my availability and then send me an invitation for a time that I look open, and then I'll block that time to meet with you. This is typically a 30-minute meeting. If we need a little more time, usually we can. You only need 15, that's fine. But this is really an opportunity for us to hear your project idea and give you feedback and answer your questions, whether that project would be eligible, whether it would be competitive, what you might not have thought about. So the point of this meeting is to give you support in submitting a successful and competitive proposal, but also in order for you to access that online application, we have to specifically check a box for your community to be able to access it. And so rather than give 202 communities access, we're only giving access to those who have scheduled that pre-application meeting. I have said here on this slide, please schedule by September 16th. The grant application is September 30th. The deadline is September 30th. This is a soft deadline, but I am encouraging you to get on the calendar sooner rather than later to get that technical assistance. If you contact me on September, 29th, it's going to be too late because that's like a Saturday, right? So just plan ahead, book some time so that we can provide you support. And then you can incorporate that feedback into your full proposal before you hit submit. That's all we're asking. Yes, it is okay if you contact me on September 17th, but we're just giving you that soft deadline so that you plan ahead. All right. What you will find on our grant program website is an application form viewer file with that name. It's basically a PDF of what the online form looks like. That's not the actual application. It just helps you visualize what the different sections are with the questions. And that's basically what it looks like when you log in the portal. So maybe one member of your team is the one who logs in, but you want to be able to show it to the town manager. They don't need to log in to see it. You have this. We've also provided you with a Microsoft Word doc for what we call the draft template. This is a downloadable tool that we've prepared for you just to make it easy for you to draft your responses and share with your colleagues and polish your final answers. We've noted the character limits. The reason we've given you character limits is so that you don't, feel like you have to write more than is necessary. The boxes for you to add your text are about 1,000 characters, 2,000 characters in some areas. I realize sometimes it's hard to limit what you want to say, but remember, don't make extra work for yourself. Say it plainly and simply, and use this tool to prepare. The whole first page is instructions. Please take a moment to read the instructions. There are things in there like, how to access the online form that we think are helpful to you. That's why we put the instructions in. But also, if you're feeling stuck, you just reach out to us and we're happy to help. There's also a downloadable budget worksheet. It's an Excel spreadsheet. There's an example. I'll show you that in a minute. You fill in your dollar amounts and you upload that in your grant submission. All righty. Next up, this is what the budget form looks like. There's a page with an example budget. And this example budget is showing you that this applicant is proposing 3 different line items: consultant services, personnel, and a software upgrade. Your proposal might have 1 line item or 2, but if it's not one of these 3, it's probably not eligible. So just look at that form. It tries to give you all the tools you need. You'll also notice in this example, you've got the total project cost, and then the grant funds are requesting 80%, the local match is 20%. Your project, you might be proposing a 50-50 match. If you want to contribute 50% of the project cost, that's fine. But just know that 80-20 is the norm. And we need to see a minimum of that, unless you're requesting some kind of hardship, and we can talk about that later if that's your situation. All right. Here's an example with the personnel costs where the consultant is 80% with a 20% match, but the personnel cost is 50-50. And then the software upgrade is this 74%, 26%. But you see the bottom line is 80-20. There might be a specific reason why you want to structure your budget that way. We'd prefer to see 80-20 in all 3 line items. But if there's a strong and compelling reason that you need it structured differently, we can talk about that. We're also perfectly happy for you to submit your budget over email and say, did I do this right? Is there any feedback you can give me? That's the number one thing that we see, is that folks have requested something that's not eligible, and we have to tell them to remove it or revise. So we're happy to help you with that before you submit. The other thing I want to highlight here is that if you are requesting personnel services, there's some special requirements around that. And we definitely want to talk about that during your pre-application meeting. We've created this section in the budget to help you calculate what portion of that personnel is eligible for the grant. If this part of the budget worksheet is confusing, we hope it's not. We hope it works well, that it's a helpful tool. But if it is, let us know. We're happy to talk it through with you. But essentially, you're not requesting 100% of that person's costs in the grant agreement, but we do want to know what's the annual take home versus the total cost for the salary and benefits for that person. And I also want to note that if you're calling it personnel, that means this person is an employee of your jurisdiction, not an independent contractor, not a consultant, right? This is an employee, either full-time or part-time, that receives a paycheck, has a timesheet maybe, not someone who is invoicing your community. I just want to pause. Any questions about that? Alrighty. If you do have questions, let's definitely cover it in your pre-application meeting. Okay. I'm going to kind of whip through some of these other items that are what you're going to upload. So again, you upload the budget spreadsheet, you upload the documentation of official action. Sometimes it's a resolution. Maybe that's your board meeting minutes. Maybe that's a letter from the mayor saying, we voted on this day. I am authorized to declare that we have committed the match and request this, right? So it could be, we're not particular about what it is, as long as it documents your official authorization to submit this grant request. Letters of support. Don't knock yourself out trying to get lots of letters of support. They're great. We love to see it, but it's not required unless it's a multi-jurisdictional project. If you are a partnership of one county and 3 municipalities, and the county is the lead applicant, we need a letter of support from each of those municipalities confirming they're aware of this grant, they are committed to the project, they're maybe contributing to the local matching requirement, but that's the only time letters of support are required. Again, we welcome them, but that's not like the biggest thing that's going to increase your chance of getting this grant. Having a good project is the most important thing, and telling us this is necessary for your community, that's the most important thing. You're welcome to share other supporting documents. Hey, we did a housing needs assessment. Hey, we've got a housing action plan. It's related to this project. Hey, fabulous. Again, very much optional. The scope of work is a very important section in the grant application. There's a checklist and a narrative. We've tried to make this easy. If one of those 8 check boxes is related to something you are doing, check the box, then describe. Limited character space means you can just put, we're doing number 3, 5, and 9. Then in the narrative box, you tell us, number 3 is software. That means we're going to upgrade from this system to that system, or we have no software, we need new software. And number 9 is other. Here's what other means to us and how it's related to affordable housing in Prop 123, right? So that's kind of a 2-part section. All right, and then who will do this work? Again, you don't need to rewrite the whole question in your text box. Use your text box to simply explain. We will hire a consulting firm with an RFP process. We have a planning consultant that we like working with, and we intend for that person to do this work. We will hire a new employee. We will use an existing employee with revised job duties. This person will be a part-time temporary independent contractor. Just spell that out for us in that text box and help us understand. All right, and at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Andy, and I'm looking at the time. We've got about 15 minutes to the top of the hour.
Okay. All right, I'll try to go quick on these because honestly, we sort of covered some of this when we talked about program criteria. The criteria we use to decide whether or not to award projects relates to the impact and outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So in your application, you're going to want to talk about how will the project impact your community's ability to meet the Prop 123 goals? Is it going to impact the number of affordable housing units reviewed? Will it impact how many more units you'll be able to review or approve in an expedited timeline? Will it impact how much time can be saved in your review process? If you predict that taking on this new software or program or code change or process change is going to save lots of time, we know that you're estimating, but share that. That helps us get a better idea for how much potential impact your project might have. Let's see. I think the next slide. Thank you. And then to what extent is it going to address systemic or root causes? I mean, that's where I think the action is really at, is getting straight to that, especially like Robin was saying, maybe right now things are going pretty well, but if you see growth on the horizon that might challenge the way you currently do business, then definitely want to look at that, address it with this grant program. If this project that you have in mind will transform your current process, we want to hear about that. We definitely will want to see that the elected officials are committed and supportive. And again, that's one of the criteria. We're not saying that they have to say now which strategies they're going to adopt, but they have to commit to saying, we are genuinely going to give our best effort to explore and adopt some of the following strategies that we think are going to be most useful and impactful for us. And then, of course, make your case. If your community lacks financial resources, make that case to us, because that is another criterion. It doesn't mean that you have to show financial hardship in order to get a grant, but it is considered as part of the scoring criteria. Another criteria that we have is inclusive community and stakeholder engagement. And, we have some general language here. It really depends, though, on what type of project you want to do and how relevant this is. I mean, in some cases, it's really about reaching out to stakeholders. In other cases, maybe where you're adopting major policies or code changes, you also want to engage the whole community to understand their concerns, build your support, and build a solution that you can get broad support on, that your elected board will feel really good about adopting. So definitely be thoughtful about how to hear from the very people that you're trying to provide affordable housing for. What are their needs? And other marginalized or underrepresented communities that are impacted by your policies and tools that you want to adopt. Include the cost for this work in your application to us and in your RFP for your consultant that you want to hire. This is something we are happy to help fund. We know affordable housing can get a lot of pushback, and so we want to really support you in your efforts to do the full stakeholder and community engagement that you need to get it to be successful. And be thinking about, are there nonprofit organizations that can help you reach different populations? Will you need translation services? Happy to help support some of that. As far as evaluation criteria goes, we're just circling back on that. We mentioned fast track is a priority for our division. It doesn't mean we will only fund communities that are adopting fast track or expedited review processes, but we definitely want to support every bit of work that you need to reach that goal and stay eligible. And we really want to keep you all eligible. In some communities, it's really about, oh my goodness, how are we going to meet this commitment, this target? And so if you have thoughts about liaisons or champions or other staff or contractors that can bring some value to help you get projects done, definitely submit for that. As far as these other criteria, readiness, just talk about your plan and your timeline and be really thoughtful about, does this timeline make sense? Don't be super ambitious to try to be more competitive. We want to see if it's realistic, your timeline. Make sure you talk about the stakeholder and community engagement you're going to have. Talk about and demonstrate your support from leadership. We will be looking at financial need and geographic diversity to the extent that we can, but ultimately we just want to fund all the good projects that are ready to go. And definitely consider in your application, do you have a plan for ongoing costs if there are any? And talk about, to the extent that you do, what that plan is. So those are some thoughts on evaluation criteria. I think now we'll go ahead.
Before we move to the next section, just one last thought on this, that support from local leadership. I just want to note that some communities have said to us, this has been pretty political in our community, and some of our council is really on board with this Prop 123 and affordable housing stuff, and some not so much. This kind of grant is the kind of thing that can help you really pave that runway, start to make those baby steps in that direction. If you tell us that is your situation in your community, that's okay. it's not going to disadvantage you. We are going to see that as like, hey, great, this might be a really good place to start. This early planning stuff can really get you, a year from now in a different space with your community. You're not, so don't be afraid to say that. There are some communities that are just gung ho for affordable housing and they've been doing it for decades. If that's not your community situation, that's okay. We get that. We've heard from a lot of communities in that situation. This could be a good starting point. So with that, I think we're ready for next. And I think Jessica is up.
Okay, so we're gonna go over the timeline. The NOFA, again, will open in the DOLA grant portal on September 1st, and you will receive a notification when that's live. Remember, you have to have a pre-application meeting with Robin and I, and that's technically how you get on the list to receive that notification about the NOFA. The deadline is September 30th, and it will take us roughly 4 to 6 weeks to score the applications. So you'll be looking for your award letter in November. Once we have worked through that, grant agreements take our contracting team roughly 3 to 8 weeks to process. So that puts you in December and January when you want to think about when your anticipated start date would be. Please no spending before you have a signed executed grant agreement. You can start working on stuff like the job descriptions and RFPs, but any expenses that are incurred before the date of the signed executed grant will not be reimbursed. I cannot emphasize that enough. So this year we have 3 funding cycles. We just wrapped one up earlier this month in July. We're looking at the September cycle right now. September 1st through the 30th is when that will be open. And again, you'll receive notification of award in November. And if September is too soon for you, we will be opening another opportunity in February. And again, that timeline is putting you in April for the award letter. We are planning to spend or award approximately $2 million in each cycle, which is about 1/3 of the available funds. That's always subject to change depending on the requests and funding in each cycle.
All right, so we are pretty close to the top of the hour. We got about 5 more minutes. If you do need to run off at, to another meeting, that's fine because you can ask all of your questions during the pre-application meeting. But we have completed going over those details. And so now we're going to stick around and just open it up for questions. And it is totally okay to ask a somewhat community specific question, because if you're wondering, someone else probably is too. So with that, do we have any questions in the chat or any hands up?
Yes, Robin, we have one question in the chat from Jenny. If you receive feedback to improve your proposal, can you resubmit in the spring cycle?
Yes. Part of it, the question cut out. So I think that the question was that if you submit a proposal in September and maybe aren't awarded, would you come back? I would say that we want to try and support you having a successful application in September. There is even the ability, if you submit that application, whether it's on, the 27th or the 30th, we're going to take the next day or two to carefully review and make sure everything in your proposal is actually eligible. If it's not, you might hear from us and we might say, oh, you've got this budget line item, but if it was, B instead of A, we could award it, but the way you've done it, it's not. And so we'll actually give you the chance to make those corrections. However, if your proposal was just a little too far outside of what is really aligned with this program, we would say, so sorry, we can't fund you this time. Let's work with you to resubmit a different proposal in the next cycle. But if we can do that all prior to the September deadline, you feel really clear about what's eligible, that's our goal. All right, any other questions or follow up on that one if there are any?
We do have another unrelated question to the one you just answered. Are we going to be making this slide deck available for the attendees to download?
Yes, within a day or two, give us a day or two, but I think we should have the recording and the slides posted to the webpage in the next couple of days so that you can reference it or share with colleagues. Currently, you can see the webinar we did back in April. There's almost the same content. There are just a couple of revisions, but for the most part, it's all the same. Any other questions? All right, don't be shy. If you have a more community-specific question, we're happy to answer that too. All right, and I think what I'm going to do is stop sharing the slide deck at this point. And we'll just stay on for the next 2 minutes if anyone has questions. Otherwise, we'll end. And please go ahead and reach out to us. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you.